I always thought the quiet would be the hardest part of getting older. But it wasn't the silence that haunted me. It was the sudden knock at the door on a Tuesday afternoon. My grandson Jason stood there with his duffel bag in one hand and a tired smile on his face. He said he just needed a place to stay for a few nights. Of course I said yes. I didn't even think twice. He was my grandson, my flesh and blood. And it felt comforting having someone else in the house again. But that night, when I saw the way he looked at me from across the dinner table, when his hand lingered just a little too long on mine, I felt something shift. Something I couldn't explain. Something I wasn't ready for. Before I tell you what happened next, because what came after this visit changed everything I thought I knew, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. If you love true, emotional stories that stay with you long after they end, you'll want to hear what happens next. Because this one, it's not what it seems. It was a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other. The kind of day when the sunlight drifts through lace curtains, soft and quiet, and the house hums with the rhythm of an old clock. I was folding towels in the laundry room, plain white ones soft from years of use, when I heard a car door close outside. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the mailman. Maybe Judy, my neighbor, bringing banana bread again. She always calls before she comes, though. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps, gentle, familiar somehow. When I opened the door, there he was. "Hi, Grandma," Jason said. His smile was a little tired, a little crooked, the same as when he was a boy. He stood there with the duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a handful of flowers. Daisies, edges slightly wilted as if bought in a hurry. "Jason," I said, surprised but smiling. "What are you doing here?" "Just passing through," he said, voice warm. "Thought I'd stop by for a few days if that's okay." I didn't hesitate. "Of course, sweetheart. You know you're always welcome." He stepped inside, glancing around the living room as though checking if everything was still where it used to be. The photos, the old Afghan, the fireplace. His eyes lingered on a picture of him at 7 years old, sitting on my lap under a beach umbrella. "Feels smaller somehow," he said, chuckling softly. "You just got taller," I replied, placing the daisies in a vase. It had been years since Jason last stayed with me. He was 29 now, working somewhere in design. I never quite understood the details, but I always listened. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man. Kind eyes. Calm voice. And there was something in the way he carried himself that reminded me of my late husband, Robert. We sat at the kitchen table with chamomile tea and fresh bread. Jason looked around, his gaze softening at the familiar sight of my old lace curtains and the worn wooden floor. "This house hasn't changed a bit," he said. "Some of us like it that way," I replied. He smiled, but there was something behind it. Something quieter, almost searching. That evening we had dinner together, just the two of us. The roast chicken was simple, the conversation easy. He told me about his new job, the long hours, the city that never really felt like home. "I miss this," he said suddenly. "The quiet. The way you always make things feel safe." I smiled, brushing his hand lightly as I reached for the salt. It was a small touch, an innocent one, but I felt something unfamiliar flicker beneath the surface. It wasn't wrong exactly, but it wasn't what I expected to feel either. After dinner, Jason offered to wash the dishes. I tried to protest, but he insisted. He stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up, humming a tune I didn't recognize. For a moment, I simply watched him. The way the porch light framed his face, the calm in his movements, the gentleness that felt so rare in this world. When he turned and caught me looking, he smiled. And I looked away too quickly, pretending to fuss with a towel. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just full. The same walls, the same clock, but somehow everything seemed to breathe again. On the mantel sat the photo of Robert and me by the lake. I touched the frame gently, feeling both the ache of memory and something new, something I didn't yet dare to name. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. Inside, I could hear Jason's slow breathing from the guest room down the hall. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee. It was strange. Normally, the silence came first. For years, my mornings had been a slow stretch of creaking joints and soft slippers against cold floors. The kitchen light would flicker on, I'd pour myself a single cup, and the house would still feel empty even as the sun poured through the windows. But that day was different. Jason had already beaten me to it. When I walked into the kitchen, he was standing at the counter, bare feet on the tile, wearing the same wrinkled white t-shirt from the night before. His hair was still messy from sleep, and yet, there was something warm about seeing him there, so casual, so at home. "Good morning, Grandma," he said, smiling. "Hope you don't mind. I found the coffee in the usual place." I chuckled, rubbing my eyes. "I should be the one making you breakfast." He handed me a mug and shrugged. "You always did enough of that when I was little. Consider this payback." We sat down across from each other, the sunlight stretching across the table like a lazy cat. Jason told me he hadn't been sleeping well lately. Said the city noise got to him. Said his job was draining. He didn't get into details, and I didn't push. Instead, we talked about simple things. The birds outside, the neighbor's new dog, the new flowers blooming in the backyard. But then came a pause. One of those long, uncertain silences that settle in when something unspoken hangs in the air. And then the twist came. Jason leaned back in his chair and looked at me, not the way a grandson looks at a grandmother, but something softer. Not quite romantic, no, but not purely familial either. "You always made this place feel like home," he said quietly. "Even when Mom and Dad were fighting, or when I felt like no one really saw me for who I was, you always did." My heart tightened. I wasn't sure what to say. It felt like he was reaching for something. Not comfort, not nostalgia, but a connection I hadn't expected. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. But instead of the usual quick touch, he held on to mine for a second longer than I expected. His thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles. It was such a small thing, and yet it wasn't. Something inside me stirred. A warmth I wasn't sure I had any right to feel. I pulled my hand back gently and gave a nervous smile. "You always were a sweet boy." He smiled too. But there was a flicker in his eyes, like he knew what he was doing. Like he was testing the air between us. After breakfast, he offered to help me with the garden. I agreed, perhaps too quickly. The morning sunlight had turned bright and warm. We worked side by side in the yard, trimming hedges, repotting the lavender, pulling weeds around the stone path. There were small touches. A hand on my back when I reached too far. A brush of his fingers as he handed me the shears. Nothing explicit. Nothing said. But everything felt different. As we paused by the rosebush, Jason suddenly turned to me and said, "You know, not everyone would understand this. But sometimes people find comfort where they don't expect it." My breath caught. The words hung there, between the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I didn't know what he meant, not exactly, but I felt it. He wasn't just talking about the house, or the peace, or the garden. He was talking about us, about this moment, about how something was shifting. And I didn't stop him. The day passed slowly, golden and gentle. By afternoon, the sun had turned the living room into a wash of honey-colored light. Jason sat at the table, sketching something in a small notebook. He said it helped him think. I pretended to read my magazine, but I found myself watching him instead. His face had grown more angular with age, but there was still that softness around his eyes, the same one from when he was a boy. I remembered the summers he used to spend here, barefoot and sunburned, chasing the dog through the yard, bringing me dandelions and calling them flowers for the queen. It should have stayed a memory. It should have felt distant. But that afternoon it didn't. Something about the way he moved, the quiet focus in his expression, it stirred something old inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. I rose to refill the kettle. "You still take your tea with honey?" I asked. Jason smiled without looking up. "You still remember?" "Of course," I said softly. The air that evening carried a cool edge, the kind that signals the end of summer. I set the table for dinner. 2 plates, simple food, the kind I've cooked my whole life. When Jason walked in, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the house. "This smells amazing," he said, pulling out a chair. "You always made everything feel like home." I laughed lightly. "That's what grandmas are for." But he didn't laugh back. He just looked at me a little too long, a little too quietly. We ate slowly. The conversation was easy enough. Work, memories, the neighbor's cat that kept sneaking onto the porch. But underneath every word, something else hummed. At one point, his hand brushed mine as we both reached for the salt. It should have been nothing. But my heart stumbled. He paused, eyes lifting to meet mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, softly, knowingly, and withdrew his hand. I looked down quickly, pretending to straighten my napkin, but my pulse had already betrayed me. After dinner, we moved to the porch. The evening light stretched long across the yard, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Jason brought 2 mugs of tea, one for me, one for him. The chains of the old swing creaked softly as we sat side by side. The first stars began to appear, faint and shy. "Do you ever feel," he began suddenly, "like the world moves too fast? Like you blink and years just disappear?" I smiled faintly. "Every day." He looked at me then, his gaze warm, searching. "You don't seem like you've changed much, Grandma. You still look the same to me." I laughed, shaking my head. "Flattery won't get you out of doing the dishes tomorrow." But he didn't laugh this time. His voice lowered, softer. "I mean it." I turned to him, intending to brush it off with another joke, but the words caught in my throat when I saw his face. The way the porch light caught his features. The sharpness of his jaw, the tenderness in his expression. It was almost too much. And that's when it happened. The twist I never saw coming. A gust of wind blew through the yard, strong enough to scatter the napkins and nearly tip over my mug. Jason reached for it at the same time I did, our hands colliding. But neither of us pulled away. His fingers wrapped around mine instinctively, firm, steady. And in that instant, just 1 heartbeat's worth of silence, the world felt suspended. His touch wasn't clumsy or uncertain. It was deliberate. And my hand didn't move. For 1 terrible, beautiful second, the air between us changed. The swing creaked once, twice. The wind quieted. And all I could hear was the sound of his breath, slow, careful, matching my own. Then as quickly as it happened, I pulled away. "I should check the kettle," I said, standing abruptly. My voice sounded too thin, too brittle. Jason didn't stop me. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Inside, the air felt heavier. The clock ticked louder, the walls closer. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a moment, a reflex, a misunderstanding. But deep down I knew better. It hadn't been nothing. It had been everything I'd spent years pretending I no longer needed. I stayed there in the kitchen until I heard him retreat down the hall, the soft creak of the guest room door closing behind him. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. The porch light flickered outside, spilling faint golden stripes across the floorboards. My reflection in the window looked almost like a stranger. Someone caught between guilt and longing, between past and present. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake for hours, staring into the dark. Jason's voice echoed in my mind. "You haven't changed much." And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I lay in bed, eyes open, listening to every creak in the floorboards and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. But mostly I was listening for something else. A door. A breath. I hated how aware I was of Jason's presence down the hall. It had never been like this when he was a child. Back then, his sleeping in the guest room felt natural, innocent. Now each passing second without sleep made the walls feel closer and the silence louder. I turned over for the 3rd time, pulling the blanket tighter, but the warmth that usually brought comfort now felt heavy, suffocating even. And then I heard it. A soft knock. 3 times. Just like the day he arrived. I sat up slowly. "Grandma." Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you awake?" I hesitated. Just a moment. "Yes." Can I talk to you for a second?" I opened the door, not sure what I expected to see. Jason stood there barefoot, wearing pajama pants and a worn sweatshirt. His hair was tousled, his eyes uncertain. "Is everything all right?" I asked. He nodded, looking down at the floor. "Yeah. I just couldn't sleep. Mind if I sit with you a bit?" I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like someone entering a sacred space. He sat at the edge of the bed while I pulled my robe tighter and settled back against the pillows. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old linen. Outside, the wind had stilled. The world felt like it was holding its breath. "I used to come in here when I was little," Jason said after a pause. "When I had nightmares. You'd sit with me, tell me stories. Rub my back until I fell asleep." I smiled softly. "I remember. You hated the story with the lost puppy, always cried at the end." He laughed lightly, the sound warm in the dimness. "Yeah. But you always made me feel safe." Another pause. Then, "I don't know where I feel safe anymore," he said. His voice cracked just a little. I turned toward him. He wasn't looking at me, his gaze fixed on his hands in his lap. Something in me shifted again. That old protective part of me, mixed now with something I didn't want to name. I placed a hand gently on his. "You're safe here, Jason. You always have been." His hand turned slowly until our palms met. Fingers laced just barely. Still quiet. Still careful. "I don't want to go back," he said suddenly. "To the noise. The people. The emptiness." "You don't have to decide tonight," I whispered. And then he looked up. Those eyes, so familiar but different now. No longer a boy's. Not quite a man's either. Something in between. Something aching. And for a heartbeat too long we just stayed there. 2 shadows in a quiet bedroom. 2 souls neither fully certain of their place. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist. It sent a jolt, warm, frightening, through my entire chest. "I should go back to bed," he said, though he didn't move. "Yes," I whispered. But I didn't move either. His hand lingered a second more, and then gently he let go. Jason stood. For a moment he looked like he might say something else. But instead he simply nodded and walked to the door. Before he left, he paused. "I'm glad I came, Grandma." And then he was gone. I sat there, alone in the half-light, heart pounding louder than the old clock ticking in the hallway. I touched my wrist where his thumb had been. Still warm. What was that moment? Comfort? Mistake? A line drawn too close to the edge? I didn't know. And maybe that was the worst part. Not knowing where the line was anymore. Or if it had already been crossed in ways we couldn't take back. The next morning, the house felt heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding on to last night's silence. Jason didn't come down right away. Usually, I'd hear him rummaging in the kitchen or humming while he made coffee. But that morning, nothing. I sat by the window, my cup cooling in my hands, watching the sunlight crawl across the yard. When he finally appeared, his eyes looked tired, his smile softer than usual. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied quietly. He poured himself a cup, then hesitated. "You didn't sleep much either, huh?" I shook my head. "Old age," I said, trying to laugh it off. But he didn't laugh. He just nodded, as though we both knew that wasn't really the reason. We spent the late morning outside again. The sky was wide and bright, and the garden was full of bees and the hum of life. Jason helped me prune the roses just like he used to when he was younger. Every now and then, his arm would brush against mine, light, unintentional, but enough to make my heart skip. He noticed. I could tell he did. At one point he paused, pruning shears still in hand. "You ever think about how fast everything changes?" he asked. Every day, I said. He leaned on the handle looking at me. When I was a kid I thought you'd always be the same. The house, the garden, you, all of it. I thought nothing could ever change here. I smiled faintly. That's the illusion of youth. We all think the world stands still until it doesn't. He nodded slowly, eyes lingering on me longer than they should have. Something in that look, something unspoken, made me turn away. It was after lunch when the twist came. I was sitting at the piano in the living room, dusting off the keys. I hadn't played in years. Jason came in, leaning against the doorway, watching me. You still remember how? He asked. Maybe, I said, smiling. Though these fingers are older than they used to be. Play something, he said softly. I hesitated, then began to play, slowly, a tune Robert used to love. The melody floated through the room, fragile and trembling, like a memory come to life. When I stopped, Jason didn't clap or speak. He just walked closer and stood beside me. That was beautiful, he said quietly. He was a lucky man. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Then he added, You still have that light in you, Grandma. The kind that makes people feel seen. It was such a simple thing to say, innocent maybe, but it hit me somewhere deep. Because for years I hadn't felt seen. Not really. Not like that. Before I could answer, he reached down and touched my shoulder. Just a hand, gentle, steady, but the weight of it sent a warmth through me I didn't know how to name. I turned to look at him, and for a heartbeat too long neither of us moved. There was nothing romantic in his eyes, and yet there was everything: closeness, gratitude, longing, confusion. I wanted to tell him to stop, to step back. But the words didn't come. Instead I said softly, You should go for a walk. Get some air. He nodded, withdrawing his hand slowly. Yeah, maybe I should. When he left, I sat there staring at the piano keys, still trembling from something that hadn't quite happened. The melody I'd played echoed faintly in the back of my mind. Robert's face came to me, his smile, his steady hands, the way he used to hum along to the same song I'd just played. For a moment I whispered into the still air. I don't know what I'm doing, Robert. I really don't. The clock ticked on, relentless and indifferent. Outside, I heard the faint crunch of Jason's footsteps fading down the gravel path. I pressed my fingers against the piano again, once gently, and closed the lid. That evening Jason didn't say much. Neither did I. But when our eyes met across the table, there was a quiet understanding there. Something fragile, something we both were afraid to name. The house had never been quieter. And I had never felt so alive or so ashamed all at once. That night I sat by the window long after Jason had gone to bed. The garden outside shimmered under the porch light, and the wind carried the faint scent of lavender. I could see his shadow moving faintly across the curtains of the guest room, pacing maybe, restless like me. I knew that neither of us had found peace since that touch at the piano. It had been small, fleeting, but it had changed everything. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders. What kind of woman feels this? What kind of grandmother wonders what her grandson is thinking at midnight behind that thin wall? I wanted to blame loneliness. I wanted to blame the years that had stretched too long, too quiet, too empty. But deep down I knew there was something more dangerous at play. It wasn't just his touch that haunted me. It was the way he looked at me. Like he saw something I had forgotten existed. The next morning came pale and gray. A thin drizzle misted the air, painting the windows in silver. Jason was already awake, sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee. Morning, I said, trying to sound casual. Morning, he echoed. His voice was softer than usual. He didn't meet my eyes right away. He just stared into his mug as though the answers to both our questions floated somewhere in that dark swirl. I'm sorry if I made things weird, he said at last. Last night. Or lately. The words hit me harder than I expected. I don't know what you mean, I lied, setting down my cup. Jason looked up finally, and his expression was both pained and gentle. Grandma, I know you do. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping gently against the windows. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about going back home. Maybe it's time." I should have agreed immediately. I should have said yes because it was the right thing to do. But instead my throat tightened. "I understand," I said. "You probably miss your friends. Your job." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Maybe." But there was no conviction in his voice. Only hesitation. After breakfast he went out to the shed to grab some tools. The gutter was loose, he said, something he could fix before he left. I watched him from the porch, hammer in hand, rain dripping from his hair. He looked so much like Robert in that moment it almost broke me. The strong, deliberate movements. The calm focus. The quiet strength. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them again he was looking right at me. The same way Robert used to look at me before he'd say something he shouldn't. "Do you need a towel?" I called out, my voice catching. He shook his head. "I'm fine." But he walked toward me anyway, stepping up onto the porch. Raindrops clung to his shirt, darkening the fabric. I reached for a towel instinctively, pressing it against his arm. He froze, then smiled faintly. "You always take care of me," he said. "Someone has to," I replied. His eyes met mine again, close now. Too close. "Maybe it's my turn," he said softly. The towel slipped from my hands. That was the moment I realized we were both standing at the edge of something we couldn't name. It wasn't love, not the way the world defines it. It wasn't desire, not in the reckless sense. It was something older, heavier, born of loneliness and memory and a kind of recognition that blurred every moral line I'd ever known. I took a step back. "Jason," I whispered, "this isn't." "I know," he said quickly. "I know. I just—" But the rest never came. He turned away before I could see the look on his face. That night I heard him pack his things. Quietly. A zipper closing. Footsteps down the hall. But the door never opened. He didn't leave. Not yet. And as the rain eased into silence, I knew something had changed again. Not outside. Inside us both. Tomorrow he would decide whether to stay or go. And I wasn't sure which one scared me more. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the stillness, that strange, heavy quiet that comes after a long storm. The air smelled clean, new, but my chest felt anything but. Jason hadn't come down for breakfast. His room door was half open, but the bed was made, sheets folded neatly. For a moment, panic flickered through me. Had he left already? Then I saw it. His duffel bag was still there, leaning against the dresser. I exhaled, slow and shaky, and stepped back into the hallway. In the kitchen, sunlight pushed through the lace curtains, scattering across the counter. I started the kettle, the familiar click grounding me in routine. If I just moved like I always did, pour the water, steep the tea, butter the toast, maybe everything would fall back into place. But when I turned, Jason was already standing there, leaning quietly against the doorway. "Morning," he said, voice low. I froze, teacup halfway to the sink. "Morning." He looked tired, not just the kind of tired that sleep could fix. Something deeper, worn at the edges. "I didn't want to wake you," he said. I was just thinking." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. He took a breath. "About staying. About leaving. About everything that's happened." My throat tightened. "Jason, last night." He held up a hand gently. "You don't have to explain. I just need to say this." He stepped closer, and my heart began to race in that same dangerous rhythm again. "When I first came here," he began, "I just needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere that still felt real." I nodded slowly. "But then, being here with you, it felt like something I didn't even know I was missing." He paused, his eyes steady, searching mine. "I know what you're thinking. I know it's wrong to even say it. But that doesn't change the truth of what I feel." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thick enough to taste. The kettle clicked off behind us, the sound sharp and final. I wanted to move to break the spell, but I couldn't. Jason, I said softly, what we feel doesn't have to be wrong. But we have to understand what it is. He gave a faint, almost sad smile. Maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it's just misunderstood. Those words landed like a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where every quiet moment of the past week had begun and ended. The steam from the tea curled between us, a fragile curtain. I used to think love had rules, I said after a long silence. That it belonged to certain ages, certain faces, certain seasons of life. But lately I'm not sure anymore. Jason listened, eyes soft. Do you regret that? He asked. I shook my head. No. I regret how much time I spent pretending not to feel it all. He nodded slowly as though my words had confirmed something he already knew. I don't want to lose this, he said quietly. Whatever this is. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had held my husband's for 40 years, that had baked every birthday cake, folded every letter, comforted every wound. And now they trembled on the table between us. You won't, I said finally. But maybe it has to change. We spent the rest of the morning outside. The sky was clear now, washed pale blue, the earth still damp beneath our feet. Jason helped me hang the laundry, passing me each piece of cloth like a ritual. He didn't speak much, and neither did I. When his fingers brushed mine as he handed me the last sheet, he didn't pull away. Instead he whispered, I'll stay one more night. I wanted to tell him not to. I wanted to tell him yes. Both truths fought inside me, tangled until I couldn't tell one from the other. So I just nodded. All right. That evening, as the sun bled gold through the trees, we sat together on the porch again. The world looked ordinary, peaceful, gentle. But between us, the air carried something fragile, alive, unspoken. Jason turned to me once, his voice barely above the wind. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, he said. Neither do I whispered. And for a long time after that, we said nothing at all. The porch creaked softly, and the distance between us stayed exactly the same, close enough to feel, far enough to keep. For now. The morning he was supposed to leave came too soon. The sky outside was soft gray, and the air felt heavy with the kind of quiet that follows decisions no one wants to make. Jason's bag was packed this time, really packed. It sat by the door like a quiet promise, or maybe a warning. I made breakfast the same way I always did. Toast, eggs, coffee, but neither of us touched much of it. Every small sound felt louder. The scrape of the fork, the tick of the clock, the sighs between silences. He looked at me across the table. You sure you'll be okay? I nodded. I always am. But the words didn't sound true even to me. He smiled faintly. You always say that. I tried to smile back, but it faltered halfway. You should go before the roads get busy, I said quietly. Yeah, he whispered. But he didn't move. He wandered through the house one last time, like he was memorizing every corner. The piano, the window seat, the shelf with old photo albums. He touched each one lightly like a prayer. Then he stopped at Robert's desk. It had been closed for years. I never moved a thing after my husband died. His old pipe still sat there. A watch with a stopped hand, a letter opener shaped like a feather. And then, tucked just beneath the blotter, Jason found it. A folded letter, the edges yellowed with time. What's this? He asked, holding it gently. My chest tightened. Just something I wrote a long time ago. I never meant for anyone to read it. He hesitated. Can I? I wanted to say no. But something in me, something tired, maybe ready, said, yes. He unfolded the paper carefully. My handwriting looked smaller now, fragile. I'd written it the year after Robert died. A letter I never sent, not to anyone. It said things I couldn't tell people back then. That I missed being touched. That the nights felt too long. That I had forgotten what it meant to be wanted. Jason's eyes moved slowly across the page. When he reached the end, he looked up at me, his throat tight. You wrote this to him? I wrote it to the silence, I said softly. to the part of me that still wanted to feel alive. He folded the paper again, careful as before, but his hands trembled slightly. Then he set it down and said, almost in a whisper, "You're still alive, Grandma. You don't have to stop feeling." I didn't know whether to cry or to run. His words weren't bold. They were tender, but they carried the same dangerous truth that had lingered between us since the day he arrived. I reached for the letter, but he caught my wrist. Not hard, just enough to still me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to make this harder." The warmth of his hand against my skin, the tremble in his voice. It was too much. Too real. Too human. "Jason," I whispered, "sometimes the hardest part of love is not letting it become something it shouldn't be." He nodded, but his eyes glistened. "And sometimes," he said, "it's pretending it never was." He stood then, finally picking up his bag. The moment stretched. A heartbeat, a breath, an entire lifetime caught in a single look. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face the way Robert once did. Then softly he kissed my forehead. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything." When the door closed behind him, the sound was small, but it echoed through every corner of the house. I sat there for a long time after he left, the letter still on the table between my hands. Outside, the garden shimmered in the weak sun, dew clinging to every petal. I thought about how some stories never really end. They just linger. In the walls, in the quiet, in the places we touch but never speak of again. And I wondered if this was one of them. The house always felt too big after someone left. But that day it wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the echoes. Every sound seemed to remember him. The floorboards creaked where he used to stand. The kitchen chair still leaned slightly back the way he sat. Even the faint scent of his soap lingered in the hallway, as if he hadn't really gone. I tried to go about my day, watering the plants, folding the laundry, kneading the dough. But everything I touched carried a ghost of that week. The warmth of a hand that shouldn't have lingered. The look that had stayed too long. The words we never said but both understood. That evening I walked out to the porch. The sunset painted the sky in quiet gold, and the wind stirred the chimes Robert hung decades ago. I sat in the old swing, the same one where Jason and I had watched the stars just days before. For a moment I could almost feel him there beside me again. The soft weight of presence, the warmth that lived somewhere between comfort and something more dangerous. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool air. "Robert," I whispered, "I hope you understand." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. It was something else, maybe gratitude, maybe guilt. Maybe both. A few days passed. The world went on as it always does. I answered calls from the ladies' group, waved to Judy next door, went to church on Sunday. Everyone said it was nice to see me smiling again. And maybe they were right. But they didn't know the reason why. They didn't know about the quiet morning tea, or the letter on the table, or the look in Jason's eyes when he said goodbye. They didn't know that sometimes the line between loneliness and longing is so thin, you only notice it after you've crossed it. A week later a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, written in Jason's uneven handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It said, "Grandma, I made it back safely. I think about that week every day. You reminded me what it means to be seen, really seen, and I'll carry that with me. I don't know what it was between us. Maybe I don't need to. But I hope wherever you are you feel alive again. Love always, Jason." I read it twice, then 3 times. My hands trembled, but my heart was calm. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside the same drawer where I'd kept Robert's, and whispered to the empty room, "I do, Jason. I do feel alive again." That night, as I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't just see an old woman. I saw someone who had loved, lost, and still had something burning quietly inside her. Something the world might not understand, but something real. And as I went to bed, I realized, sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Maybe what happened between us wasn't wrong. Maybe it was just human. And maybe that's enough. Soft music fades in. Before I end this story, I want to thank you, truly, for listening. Stories like this, they aren't easy to tell. But they remind us that no matter our age, our hearts still feel, still remember, still reach for connection. If you've ever known loneliness or found comfort in someone you didn't expect, you'll understand. Tell me in the comments below. Do you believe love can take new forms even when the world says it shouldn't? And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel for more true, emotional stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that echo the loudest.